The crew aboard the Jester couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of their mission. Commander Lucas West, a man with little ambition, found himself the reluctant leader of a ship that no one took seriously. The Jester was a relic, cobbled together from the wreckage of older ships. Patched up with experimental technologies no one wanted to risk on a real vessel. Its weapons systems were unreliable, its hull barely strong enough to withstand a sustained attack, and its engines, well, they sputtered more than they roared. But what the crew lacked in equipment, they made up for in spirit. West wasn't a decorated officer, just a man who had always been in the right place at the right time. His promotion to captain was as much a result of him not being anyone's first choice for the position as it was his own qualifications. The crew, a mix of misfits and second-chancers, looked up to him only because there was no one else to look up to. The mission was simple: patrol a quiet sector of human space, far from any major conflicts. The Jester's orders were to remain inconspicuous, monitoring for any signs of alien activity. The crew could almost hear the collective eye roll from their superiors when the ship was assigned this task. No one expected the Jester to find anything. And if they did, well, it was probably something too small to matter anyway. The ship's performance would surely be forgettable. But as the Jester drifted deeper into the uncharted sector, Commander West couldn't shake a strange feeling. They'd been out for weeks with no sign of trouble, just the hum of the engines and the steady click of the crew's work. Maybe, just maybe, things would stay calm. But a sinking feeling gnawed at him, the kind that whispered something was about to change. Then it happened. The sensors, which had been suspiciously quiet for so long, suddenly erupted into activity. The radar pinged wildly, marking a massive fleet approaching from the far side of the star system. West's stomach twisted in disbelief. The readings weren't like anything they had ever seen before. The fleet was large, too large for a single ship or even a small group. And they weren't human. "Captain, you need to see this," Lieutenant Nora Davis, the ship's navigator, said in a tight voice. West hurried over to the bridge, scanning the holographic display that now illuminated the room. The alien ships were vast, their hulls adorned with strange markings and weapon systems that hummed with dangerous energy. They were moving fast, and they were coming straight for the Jester. "Identify them," West ordered, but deep down, he already knew the answer. "They're Cricks, sir," Davis responded, her voice trembling. The Cricks Dominion. The Cricks were a nightmare to anyone who crossed their path. A savage and war-hungry species known for their brutal conquests and utter disregard for life. Their ships were among the most advanced in the galaxy, with weapons capable of obliterating entire fleets in the blink of an eye. They didn't come to negotiate or to explore. They came to destroy. Commander West's mind raced. This was no simple patrol anymore. They were about to face the most feared military in the galaxy, and they were alone. The Jester was outmatched in every possible way. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," West said, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're not going down without a fight." The crew scrambled into action, each person instinctively falling into their roles. West took a deep breath. The Jester was a joke, yes, but it was their ship. And if there was one thing the humans of the galaxy had learned, it was that the greatest weapon they had was their will to survive. With the Cricks ships closing in, the crew of the Jester was about to learn just how far that will could take them. The Jester's hull rattled as the Cricks fleet closed in. West gripped the edge of his command chair, eyes scanning the view ahead. It was only a matter of minutes before the enemy would open fire, and the Jester, with its outdated systems and laughable armor, didn't stand a chance in a straight-up fight. The bridge hummed with a flurry of activity. Lieutenant Nora Davis was at her console, hands flying over the controls. "Captain, we're being targeted. They're locking on with their forward cannons. Evasive maneuvers, now," West barked. He didn't need to hear the rest. The crew didn't have time for formalities. "All hands, brace for impact." Davis yelled as the first blast of energy from the Crick ships tore through the space ahead of them. The Jester lurched violently to the side, its engines straining as they pushed the ship into a hard, erratic turn. West held onto the edge of his seat with both hands, trying to steady himself against the ship's sudden movements. A high-pitched alarm blared, and the shield status indicator flickered uncertainly. The Jester's shields were already down to 40%. "Get those shields back up," West ordered. "Davis, keep us moving. Don't let them lock on." "I'm trying, Captain." Davis snapped back, her face tight with concentration. "But they're faster than we are. We can't outrun them. And we can't outgun them. Their weapons are too powerful." West's mind raced. The Jester wasn't built for this. It had no heavy artillery or cutting-edge technology. It was a relic, a ship that was supposed to serve as little more than a joke. But in that moment, West realized something. He didn't have the luxury of being afraid. There was no time to second-guess himself. He needed to do what he did best: think on his feet. "Do we still have those decoy drones in the hold?" West asked. "Yes, Captain," said Ensign Jane Pierce, the weapons officer. "But they're not built to stand up to these kinds of blasts. If we deploy them, we're out of options. I don't care. We need them now. Davis, move us within range of their flank. Pierce, deploy the drones and prepare the backup torpedoes." There was a brief pause. Then Davis nodded. "Flanking position. Aye." Pierce quickly activated the ship's drone systems, sending out a wave of small, disposable craft. They shot off into the void like scattered sparks, designed to distract, confuse, and hopefully buy them a little more time. The Crick's ships took the bait. They fired at the drones, their lasers cutting through the empty space as the Jester turned sharply, darting away from the line of fire. The drones didn't stand a chance, exploding into a shower of sparks, but it was enough. The Crick's fleet had shifted their focus, and in doing so had made a critical mistake. "Now, Pierce, fire the torpedoes," West ordered, his voice full of urgency. With a flash, the Jester unleashed its payload. The torpedoes, powered by jury-rigged systems and guided by the last sliver of the ship's remaining energy, streaked toward one of the smaller Crick's vessels, catching it completely off guard. The torpedoes slammed into the alien ship's side, sending it into a violent spin. The Jester's crew watched as the enemy vessel erupted in a fiery explosion. "One down." "We got one," Ensign Pierce shouted, her voice tinged with disbelief. West didn't allow himself to smile, even as a rush of adrenaline coursed through his veins. "We've got their attention now. Keep it up. They won't expect this." But as the remaining Crick ships began to adjust their tactics, West could already see the cost. The Jester was damaged, its shields flickering in and out, and they had no way of sustaining this fight for long. The Cricks would regroup. They were relentless. "Captain," Davis warned, her voice low, "they're recalibrating. If they get another shot like that, we'll be vaporized." West's mind whirred. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. Not after they had come so far. "Prepare the last-ditch countermeasure," West said, his voice steady despite the looming threat. "We're going to make this a fight they'll never forget." The crew responded instantly, working with a rhythm they hadn't known was possible. This wasn't a joke anymore. The Jester wasn't a symbol of failure. It was a ship fighting for its life, and it was going to show the Cricks exactly what humanity was capable of. The battle raged on, and the once helpless Jester had turned into a nightmare the Cricks hadn't expected. The small human warship darted and weaved through the void, dodging alien fire with surprising agility. Despite its battered exterior, the Jester had something the Cricks couldn't understand: unpredictability. "Keep pushing them. We can't let up." Commander West barked over the comms. His voice had gained a new edge, calm, but with a relentless determination that energized the crew. "Captain," Lieutenant Davis said, her fingers flying over the controls, We're down to 20% shields. Another hit like that, and we won't have enough power to keep evasive maneuvers going." West's stomach tightened. The situation was precarious, but they couldn't let the Cricks know how close they were to the edge. The crew, despite their lack of resources, was doing something incredible. The Jester was holding its own against an overwhelming force. But if they couldn't take the fight to the Cricks, the ship would eventually be torn apart. "Pierce," West said, his eyes narrowing, "I need those torpedoes again. Now." Ensign Pierce, the weapons officer, quickly keyed in the command. "Aye, Captain." Preparing for launch. The human crew had learned quickly. The Jester wasn't designed to be a heavy hitter, but its systems, fueled by ingenuity and desperation, had managed to develop an unorthodox pattern. Pierce's torpedoes weren't the standard issue. They were a mix of conventional warheads with experimental modifications, allowing for precise targeting even with the ship's outdated guidance systems. "Fire!" West shouted. The torpedoes shot out, guided by a mere flicker of the Jester's last reserves of power. They raced toward a Crick's cruiser, hitting it dead center. The explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through space. The Crick's ship faltered, its weapons systems disabled. "We got another one," Pierce said, a hint of disbelief in her voice. West didn't smile. The Cricks were fast adapting, their ships regrouping for a larger strike. It was clear they had underestimated humanity. Now, they were retaliating with fury. The battle had escalated from a simple skirmish to a deadly dance of survival. But as West surveyed the carnage, something clicked. He wasn't just trying to survive anymore. He was fighting back, showing the Cricks that humanity was more than just a joke. The Jester wasn't some relic. It was proof that humanity had the resilience to fight against impossible odds. "Captain," Davis called out, a note of panic in her voice. "Another fleet is entering the system. The Cricks are bringing reinforcements." West's heart sank. He had hoped to make it out before the full might of the Cricks' empire arrived. But with no way of retreating, there was no choice. They had to keep pushing. "Patch me through to the fleet," West ordered, his voice firm. "Tell them to keep their distance. This is our fight." The comms officer, Ensign Rick Harrison, nodded, his hands dancing across the console. "Done, sir. We've got incoming reinforcements from the human fleet, but they're not in position yet." The Jester was now alone in the field, surrounded by the swelling tide of Crick's forces. The chances of winning seemed slimmer by the second, but Commander West wasn't about to back down. "All hands, prepare for a desperate play," West said, his voice hard. "Davis, take us into their formation. We're going in close. We'll make them think twice about finishing us off." "What are you?" Lieutenant Davis started, but West cut her off. "Just trust me," he said, his eyes flashing with confidence. With nothing left to lose, Davis adjusted their trajectory. The Jester roared forward, heading straight into the heart of the Crick's fleet. It was a suicide move, but one that would catch the Cricks off guard. The alien ships, stunned by the audacity of the human maneuver, scrambled to recalibrate their weapons. The Jester weaved between massive Crick's cruisers, dodging beams of fire and cutting a swath of destruction. Every blast of energy that struck the ship's hull shook the crew to the core. But the human warship held steady, its outer plating scorching but intact. The ship wasn't built for this level of punishment, but humanity's will was pushing it past its limits. "Deploy more drones, keep them distracted," West ordered. As the Jester became the focal point of the Cricks' fury, its drones shot out once more, darting through space to confuse the enemy. It was a cheap tactic, but it worked. The Cricks were no longer attacking as a unified front. Their ships were scrambling to lock on to the unpredictable movements of the Jester and its decoys, wasting valuable firepower. In that chaos, Commander West seized the opportunity. "Pierce, fire everything we've got left," he shouted. In a final, desperate move, the last of the Jester's torpedoes and pulse cannons lit up the dark void, finding their mark. The Crick's ships were not prepared for this kind of fight, and their overconfidence proved costly. The Jester's barrage tore through another Crick's vessel, this one much larger, sending it spiraling out of control. There was a moment of stunned silence as the Crick's forces realized something they never anticipated. They were losing. West stood tall, his heart pounding. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. The Jester had become a symbol of humanity's defiance. And now, the Crick's were learning a painful lesson. Humanity might just be the galaxy's next nightmare. The battle had been going on for hours. The Jester, its hull scorched and its systems barely holding together, had managed to stay one step ahead of the Crick's fleet. But West knew they couldn't keep up the pace much longer. The human ship had endured more than anyone had expected, but it was beginning to show signs of strain. Shields were down to a critical level, engines were malfunctioning, and there were alarms blaring from every corner of the ship. "Captain, we've got a serious problem with the port engine," reported Chief Engineer Cal Thompson. "It's starting to overheat. If we don't cut power, we'll lose it entirely." West didn't even flinch. "Do what you can, Cal. Just keep us in the fight." The ship had taken far more damage than it should have, and yet it still flew. West couldn't help but be impressed by the resilience of the Jester and its crew. They were defying every expectation, and each small victory felt like a win for humanity itself. But the Crick's weren't giving up. With every passing minute, their reinforcements grew stronger, and their resolve more determined. The human ship was facing a near-impossible situation, and the odds were only growing worse. But as Commander West surveyed the battle from the bridge, something else was becoming clear. The Crick's had underestimated humanity in a way they hadn't accounted for. The Jester might not have the firepower to face down a full armada, but it had one thing the Crick's hadn't anticipated: ingenuity. "Captain, the Crick's are changing formation," Davis called out, her fingers flying over the controls. "They're going for a direct assault." West's eyes narrowed. This was it. The Crick's were planning to end it all with a final, crushing blow. But the humans had something else in mind. They weren't going to just stand there and wait to be destroyed. They weren't going to go down quietly. "Pierce, are we in range for the plasma torpedoes?" West asked, his voice calm despite the mounting pressure. "I think so, sir," Pierce replied, her voice tight. "But the targeting systems are glitching badly. We've got one shot at this." One shot. West's mind raced. The Jester had always been a ship of last chances. Every time it had come close to falling apart, something miraculous had happened to keep it afloat. This was no different. It was going to be a gamble, but there was no other choice. The Crick's were about to unleash hell, and humanity had to fight back with everything they had. "Do it," West commanded. With a series of whirs and clicks, Pierce launched the plasma torpedoes. They sped toward the approaching Crick's warships, trailing behind the Jester as the ship veered into an evasive maneuver. The torpedoes flew straight toward the heart of the enemy fleet, their advanced guidance systems locked on the most critical targets. The first explosion rocked the battlefield. The torpedoes struck a massive Crick's battleship, sending it into a spiral of fire and debris. Another followed, then another. The Jester's unconventional strategy, using misfires and targeting systems that no one thought would work, was beginning to pay off. But the battle wasn't over yet. "We've got more incoming," Lieutenant Davis shouted, her voice strained. "Their flagship is still on course. If it reaches us, we're done for." West didn't hesitate. His fingers flew across the command console, pressing buttons and issuing orders. The Jester's crew had already pulled off miracles, but this was their moment to truly prove they could fight back. "Engage the emergency warp drive," West said, his voice steady. "We're going to take the fight to their flagship." "We don't have enough power, sir," Thompson shouted back. "It'll overload the core." "I don't care," West snapped. "Do it anyway." "Now." Thompson hesitated, and then, with a grim nod, he began rerouting what little power they had left. The Jester's engines hummed louder, the ship's systems thrumming with energy. With one final surge, the human ship disappeared into a brief flash of light, warping just a few miles ahead of the Crick's flagship. The sudden shift caught the Cricks off guard. The flagship, just moments from obliterating the Jester, found itself in the perfect position to be attacked. The Jester dropped out of warp, only a few hundred yards from the massive ship, and in that split second, Pierce fired everything they had left. Plasma beams, torpedoes, pulse cannons, all of it slammed into the Crick's flagship's exposed flank. A chain reaction of explosions detonated along its hull. The flagship shook violently as its shield systems crumpled under the force of the human assault. The shockwaves sent tremors through the surrounding ships, disorienting the rest of the Crick's fleet. For a few heart-stopping seconds, everything went quiet. And then the unthinkable happened. The Crick's flagship exploded in a blinding burst of light, sending debris scattering in every direction. The battle had taken a drastic turn. The flagship, the heart of the Crick's fleet, had been destroyed in a single desperate move by a ship no one had taken seriously. The Cricks were in shock. Their most powerful ship, gone. In that instant, Commander West and the crew of the Jester had shown the galaxy that they weren't just survivors, they were fighters, and they had dealt a blow that the Cricks would never recover from. The aftermath of the explosion was almost surreal. The Jester hung in the cold void, its hull battered and smoking, yet miraculously intact. The Crick's fleet had been thrown into chaos. The destruction of their flagship was a blow from which they might never recover. The remaining ships were still regrouping, trying to process what had just happened. But Commander West knew better than to think the battle was won. "We've got maybe 10 minutes before they regroup," Lieutenant Davis said, her voice tight as she examined the tactical display. "They're furious, Captain. They're going to come at us hard." West nodded grimly, his gaze fixed on the wreckage of the Crick's flagship, now a burning hulk floating in space. The sheer scale of what they had just done was sinking in. They had killed the heart of the Crick's fleet, and now the enemy was wounded, desperate, and vulnerable. But that meant they were even more dangerous. "We don't have 10 minutes, West replied, his voice cold and focused. "We have 5, maybe less. I want to know exactly what we have left in terms of power." Chief Engineer Cal Thompson's voice crackled over the comms. "We're running on fumes, sir. The core's stability is down to 30%. If we push it any harder, it's going to melt down." West cursed under his breath. The Jester had pushed every limit, but they couldn't keep relying on desperation forever. They needed a way to capitalize on their victory before their resources ran out. "Can we get any more power out of the engines?" West asked, his voice clipped with urgency. Thompson was silent for a moment. "I can try, but I won't be able to guarantee a safe return if we do." West's mind raced. Their situation was dire. If the Jester didn't make it out of this battle, it would all be for nothing. The crew had fought too hard, survived too much, to let it end now. "We can't run. We have to finish this," West said, his tone final. "Davis, find me a way to disable their fleet before they can regroup. We need to hit them where it hurts most." Davis's fingers flew over her console. "There's a weak spot in their formation. It's risky, but if we can hit their command vessels with a concentrated strike, we might be able to force a retreat. It'll be a gamble, though. We won't get another shot if we miss." "Then we don't miss," West said. "Prepare everything we got left, Pierce. We make this one shot count." The tension in the air was palpable. The Jester was down to its last reserves of power, its systems on the verge of failure. Yet, the crew was working together like a well-oiled machine, fighting not just for survival, but for a chance to turn the tide. The Cricks were formidable, but humanity had something they couldn't understand: sheer willpower and a refusal to accept defeat. "We've got one shot at this," Pierce said, her voice tight, as she checked the status of the weapon systems. "The plasma torpedoes are fully primed, but after this, We're out of ammo. West didn't hesitate. Do it. The Jester lunged forward, its damaged engines screaming in protest. They were moving directly into the heart of the enemy's remaining forces, closing in on the lead command ship of the Crick's fleet. The distance between them shrank with every second. The crew of the Jester held their breath as the tension built to a near breaking point. "Ready to fire, Captain," Pierce shouted. "Fire," West ordered, his voice ringing out like a battle cry. The torpedoes flew, hurtling toward the massive Crick's command ship. In the last moments before impact, it felt like the universe had paused, holding its breath. The Jester's crew had done the impossible, taking the fight to an enemy that had never expected it. Now, all their hopes rested on this one shot. The explosion rocked the battlefield, sending shockwaves that reverberated through the remaining Crick's fleet. The command ship was obliterated in an instant, and the other ships, thrown into disarray, hesitated. The loss of their leadership was a devastating blow, and the Crick's fleet began to falter. "We got them," Lieutenant Davis exclaimed, almost laughing with relief. "They're pulling back. They're retreating." West allowed himself a moment of relief, his breath coming in a deep, steadying exhale. The Jester had done it. They had broken the Crick's fleet. But as the ship floated amidst the burning wreckage of the battlefield, West knew the victory was fragile. The Cricks were a proud species, and this defeat would not go unanswered. But for now, humanity had made its mark. "All hands, prepare for evasive maneuvers," West said, his voice calm once again, despite the triumph. "We're not out of this yet. Stay alert." As the Jester began to move, its engine sputtering and groaning in protest, Commander West looked out at the wreckage of the Crick's fleet, his mind already turning to what would come next. They had survived, yes, but the galaxy had just learned one undeniable truth. Humanity was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. And this battle, it was only the beginning. The Jester floated silently in the wake of the destroyed Crick's fleet, its battered hull catching what little light the distant star offered. The Cricks had retreated, for now. Commander West knew the victory, while significant, wasn't one that would buy them time for long. The universe had a way of punishing those who thought they had won too soon. "Captain, long-range sensors are picking up more Crick's ships," Lieutenant Davis reported, her face illuminated by the flashing consoles. "They're regrouping, but they're not heading for us." West raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "They're heading toward the edge of the system," she said. "It looks like they're forming up for another operation, possibly a counteroffensive." West clenched his jaw. The Cricks weren't the kind of race to retreat indefinitely. They would lick their wounds, regroup, and strike again, likely with even greater force. Humanity had only delayed the inevitable. The Jester's victory, however hard-earned, would not be enough to change the course of the war unless they could press their advantage. "Send a message to the fleet," West said. "Tell them to stay on standby. We're going after them. If the Cricks are pulling back to regroup, we'll disrupt their plans before they can stage another attack." A beat of silence followed before Lieutenant Davis spoke again, her voice quieter now. "Captain, are we sure about this? We're barely holding together. The Jester is a wreck. If we go after them now—" "I'm not asking for your opinion, Davis," West snapped, his voice steel-sharp. "We're going. Do it." The crew was silent, understanding the weight of his words. They had fought too hard, too long, to simply sit back and let the Cricks rebuild. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about sending a message to every empire in the galaxy. Humanity was here, and it wouldn't be driven into the shadows. As the Jester limped toward the edge of the system, where the Cricks were reforming their forces, the crew's focus was palpable. Ensign Pierce stood at her station, adjusting the weapons systems, her face set with determination. "All torpedoes are loaded, Captain," she said. "We've got one more shot. Let's make it count." West nodded, his mind sharp. "We won't miss this time." For a few moments, there was nothing but the hum of the ship's failing systems and the soft whispers of the crew moving in sync. But as the Jester approached the target coordinates, the gravity of their situation became clear. The Cricks were already preparing a full-scale attack, their ships massing near a nearby asteroid field. They were well aware of their previous loss and were now trying to regroup and launch a counteroffensive. Davis gritted her teeth as she worked the controls. "Captain, their ships are heavily armored. They're expecting a fight. This will be tougher than anything we've faced so far." "That's why we're going in hot," West replied. "Pierce, can we target their main engines?" Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Not with our current systems, but I think I can override the targeting protocols. If I get a clean shot, we'll have a window to disable their fleet." "Do it," West ordered. "Davis, take us in. Full speed." The Jester surged forward, its engines roaring with a final burst of energy, despite their dangerously low capacity. The ship veered toward the asteroid field, weaving between the floating rocks with precision, narrowly avoiding collisions with each violent turn. The Cricks fleet ahead seemed unaware of their approach. Then, in an instant, the Jester was upon them, closing in at an alarming speed. The bridge crew was tense, their eyes glued to the redouts, tracking the enemy vessels, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Now, Pierce," West barked. With a swift motion, Pierce activated the weapons, sending a volley of torpedoes hurtling toward the lead Crick's flagship. They struck with surgical precision, blasting through the ship's weakened shields and slamming into its engines. The flagship lurched violently, its power systems sparking and flickering. "We've disabled their main engines," Pierce shouted triumphantly. "Good. Now finish it off," West said. Before the Crick's flagship could recover, the Jester unleashed the last of its remaining weaponry. Pulse cannons blazed to life, ripping into the disabled flagship, tearing its armor apart. The Crick's flagship exploded in a fiery blast, sending shockwaves through the remaining enemy vessels. Panic spread across their ranks as their lead ship was destroyed in the blink of an eye. The Jester's crew erupted in cheers, relief and exhilaration flooding the bridge. They had just taken down another massive target, but West knew it wasn't over yet. The rest of the Crick's fleet was still intact, and they were far from finished. The loss of their flagship might cause some confusion, but it wouldn't stop them for long. Davis gritted her teeth as she turned the ship to avoid incoming fire. "Captain, we've got incoming ships closing in. They're trying to surround us." West's eyes narrowed. The Jester might have just knocked out the head of the Crick's fleet, but now they were in the jaws of the beast. "Brace for impact," he said. "All hands, get ready. We're going to make this fight personal." The Jester swerved to avoid a barrage of enemy fire, weaving through the remaining Crick's ships like a fighter in a dogfight. For all their firepower, the Cricks still hadn't learned how to combat the unpredictability of humanity's tactics. The Jester was too fast, too erratic, and its crew too determined to be taken down easily. "We're not backing down now," West said, his voice hard. "Prepare for the final push." The Jester was a storm in the midst of chaos, darting and weaving between the shattered remnants of the Crick's fleet. The Crick's ships, though vast and imposing, struggled to keep up with the relentless unpredictability of humanity's tactics. Commander West stood tall on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical map, watching as his crew pulled off maneuvers that seemed impossible in such a damaged vessel. "We've taken heavy hits, Captain," Lieutenant Davis reported, her voice steady despite the growing chaos around her. "Hull integrity is at 45%, and we're running on fumes with the power grid. If we take any more hits in the next few minutes, we'll be in trouble." West took a breath, his gaze scanning the ship's diagnostics on the holoscreen. The Jester had been through hell and back, and now, in the midst of the fight, its systems were on the brink of collapse. Yet, the crew wasn't backing down. They had come too far to fail now. "We're going to finish this," West said, his voice calm but resolute. "Get us closer to their command cluster. We need to hit them hard before they regroup. Davis nodded, her fingers dancing across the console. The ship lurched forward, engines protesting with every strained turn. The Cricks were regrouping around the wreckage of their flagship, desperate to reorganize and retaliate. West knew that if they allowed the Cricks to rebuild their formation, they would face an even greater onslaught. The odds were still stacked against them, but the Jester had defied the impossible before, and they would do it again. "Pierce, are the remaining torpedoes ready?" West asked, his voice firm. Pierce, who had been firing rapidly at the incoming enemy ships, wiped the sweat from her brow. "We've got 2 left. They'll need to count." West nodded grimly. "They will." The Jester surged forward once more, skimming through debris and flares of plasma fire. The remaining Crick ships closed in, trying to encircle them, but West saw an opening. The remaining ships were spread thin, desperate to cover every angle, and that was their weakness. They couldn't keep up with the fluid, unpredictable moves of a ship like the Jester, especially when they were running on nothing but determination. "Set a course through the gap between their outer lines," West ordered. "We'll break through to their command ships. That's where we need to strike." "Understood," Davis said, gritting her teeth as she pulled the ship into a tight turn. "Hold on." The Jester careened through the gap, plasma fire searing past their hull, but miraculously, the ship dodged, slipping through the Crick's formation like a needle through fabric. Their weapons blazed in retaliation, but the Jester was too fast, too erratic to be hit. With each passing second, they were getting closer to the heart of the enemy formation. "Targeting their command vessels now," Pierce reported, her fingers flying over her console. "Ready to fire." West's eyes never left the enemy ships on the tactical display. Their formations were crumbling, their systems overwhelmed by the Jester's relentless assault. It was time. "Fire everything we've got," West commanded. In an instant, the Jester unleashed its remaining torpedoes and pulse cannons in a blinding flurry of destruction. The enemy ships didn't have time to react. The first torpedo hit a Crick's command ship directly, its shields crumpling under the force of the blast. The second torpedo found its mark, tearing through another flagship's core and sending it into a fiery spiral. The remaining Crick ships in the area scattered in disarray, unable to mount a proper defense. For a brief moment, it seemed like the battle had come to a halt. The stunned Crick's fleet had lost its command structure, and without it, they were lost. The Jester's crew stood frozen, hearts racing as the final moments of the battle played out. But West wasn't about to let his guard down. The Cricks were relentless, and they had one final card to play. "Captain, we've got multiple vessels warping in," Davis warned, her voice rising with urgency. "It's another fleet. They're arriving faster than expected." West's stomach tightened. They had pushed the Cricks to the edge, but the last-minute reinforcements could shift everything in the blink of an eye. The Jester was still far from capable of facing another full fleet, especially with its power grid on the verge of collapse. "Get us out of here," West ordered. "Plot a course to the nearest moon. Maximum warp." But it was too late. As the Jester began to turn, the first wave of incoming ships arrived. Their weapons fired almost immediately, and before anyone could react, the Jester was hit hard. The ship shook violently, sending everyone on the bridge sprawling. Sparks erupted from several panels, and the lights flickered as emergency alarms blared. "Damage report," West shouted, struggling to stay on his feet. Davis coughed, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. "We've lost power to the aft thrusters. Shields are at 10%, and we've got a hull breach in sections 4 through 6. "Can we fight back?" West asked, his voice calm, but his mind racing. "We can try," Pierce said through gritted teeth, still at her station. "We have limited firepower, but if we target their engines—" "Do it," West interrupted. "We have one chance." The Jester's remaining weapons fired with every last ounce of power they had, hitting the closest Crick's ships in the engine compartments. 2 of them faltered, their propulsion systems failing. The enemy ships began to stagger, giving the Jester a small window to escape. "We're not done yet," West growled. "Davis, get us to that moon. Now." The Jester roared forward, its damaged engines sputtering as they pushed the ship to its limits. The crew held their breath as the ship plunged toward the moon, the Krix fleets scrambling behind them. But the Jester had made its mark, and no matter how dire the situation, Commander West knew they had won something far more important than just a single battle. They had shown the universe that humanity wasn't backing down. The Jester limped toward the shadowed surface of the moon, its damaged engines barely keeping the ship on course. The bridge was a scene of controlled chaos, but the crew worked with a determination that defied the odds. The emergency lights flickered weakly, casting the space around them in an eerie red glow. West gripped the arm of his seat, his eyes fixed on the tactical screen as the remaining Krix ships pursued. "Captain, we're running out of time," Lieutenant Davis said, her voice tight. "They're closing in fast. Our shields are almost gone, and the engines are sputtering. If we don't make it into the moon's shadow soon, we won't be able to escape." West's mind raced. The Jester's systems were on the brink of failure, and the Krix were not going to let them get away so easily. But they had one advantage: time and the moon's surface. "We can't outrun them," West said, his voice calm despite the pressure. "But we can hide." Davis looked up, confusion flashing in her eyes. "Hide, Captain." "We use the moon's surface for cover," West explained quickly, his thoughts turning over as he surveyed the data. "We'll hide in the craters and use the terrain to mask our signature. It'll give us a few minutes to reset systems and prepare a counterattack. We've done the impossible before. We can do it again." The crew didn't hesitate. They had fought through worse, and if Commander West believed they could survive, they would follow him to the ends of the universe. With Davis at the helm, the Jester veered toward a large crater on the moon's surface. The Krix ships followed, firing blindly into the asteroid field, thinking the Jester was somewhere among the debris. "We're going to make it," Pierce said, her voice shaking with exhaustion but filled with resolve. "Once we're hidden, we'll be able to make repairs. We've got enough to hit them hard when the time comes." "Not yet," West replied, his eyes scanning the hull integrity reports again. "We need to wait. If we fire now, we'll give away our position. I need them to get close, to think they have us cornered." Davis held her breath as they entered the shadow of the crater, quickly disappearing from the radar scans of the Krix ships. The Jester's signature blended with the surface, masking their presence. The ship's lights dimmed, and the crew fell into silence as they prepared for the next phase. Minutes passed in tense anticipation. On the outside, the battle seemed to have stalled, but inside, the Jester's crew was busy with a single mission: survival. West gave orders to the engineering team to begin repairs on the critical systems, while Pierce checked every weapon at her disposal. The ship was a ticking time bomb, but it could still deliver one last strike. "Captain," Davis whispered, her voice low as she peered through the sensors. "They've stopped searching. They think we're gone." West's jaw tightened. "Then it's time to show them we're not." With a deep breath, West stood and turned toward the crew. "Prepare for a counterstrike. We're going to take out as many of their ships as we can before they realize what's happening. I need everyone to be sharp. This isn't just about survival anymore. This is about sending a message." The crew moved quickly, fueled by the adrenaline of the battle and the desperate need to prove themselves. The Jester's hull groaned under the strain as its systems powered back up. The weapons banks came online, and the engines, though weak, roared back to life. The ship was no longer a shadow. It was a predator preparing for the final strike. West stood by Davis's side, watching as the Krix ships slowly started to pass overhead. They were too focused on the craters, searching the surface for a ship that was no longer there. The tension in the air was thick, and the crew knew that when they fired, they had to do so with precision. "Now," West said, his voice cold, "take them down." The Jester sprang to life. The first volley of torpedoes blasted from the ship's weapons array, cutting through the thin atmosphere of the moon and slamming into the nearest Krix ship. The enemy vessel erupted in a brilliant burst of flame, a brilliant beacon of destruction in the otherwise quiet expanse of space. The other ships in the Krix fleet scrambled to react, but it was too late. Another volley followed, then another. The Jester's pulse cannons fired in rapid succession, slamming into the remaining Krix ships, targeting engines and weak points. Within moments, the Krix fleet that had been so confident just hours before was in disarray. The Jester had dealt them a crippling blow. "We've got their command ships on the run," Pierce shouted, her voice a mix of disbelief and triumph. "We've torn apart their front lines. They're retreating." West allowed himself a small smile, though his heart was still racing. They had done it. The Jester, a ship they had once called a joke, had shattered the Krix's confidence and crippled their fleet. The tides of the war had changed in an instant. But even as the last of the Krix ships retreated, West knew this victory came at a cost. The Jester was barely holding together. The war was far from over, and there would be no rest for his crew. The galaxy had just learned a painful truth. Humanity would no longer be underestimated. "We're not done yet," West said, his voice unwavering. "Prepare for extraction. We're going to finish what we started." The Jester may have been a joke at the start, but now it was an unstoppable force, and humanity had proven that it was no laughing matter.